You're about to hear Andy Shectman and I speak in front of a class of students learning about wealth and financial freedom. Their teacher watches my channel and invited me to speak in front of the class talking about silver. So I was mentioning this to Andy on the phone because I actually spoke to their class previously. It was just a phone call, but it was really cool. Their students asked me questions, I answered them, but we wanted to do a Zoom call and he invited more people on. There's about 20 students in this Zoom call, so you might hear some background noise. But their teacher, Elvis, asked several questions from gold, silver, the BRICS nations, the economy, and more. This is a very deep discussion, especially towards the end. So I hope you guys enjoy.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming on the Zoom call. This is Silver Slayer. He has a huge YouTube channel, and then you got Andy Shectman. He owns one of the biggest and most reputable precious metals businesses in the country. Just to give you a little bit of background about him, there was, correct me if I'm wrong on the number, but there was a woman who wanted to purchase $52 million worth of silver, and you was the only one in the country to fill that order. Is that correct?
Well, we had two orders,
Oh,
one of
really?
50 and one of 52 within about an 8-month period.
Wow.
And I've done this for 30, going on 35 years, and I've never had anything even remotely that close on either side of it.
Wow. And why were you able to fill that order versus the other dealers?
Well, I've been doing this longer than anybody. We've done over 10 billion in sales in 34 and a half years. I have connections with all of the major dealers, all the major importers. It's a relationship-based business. And so having relationships all around the globe, I was able to, within a very short period of time, in fact, the first one was over the July 4th weekend, and it was like on the first, we had 3 days to get it done, and we did get it done before the holiday started because I have access to a lot of people and my reputation is good so that people would extend on my verbal. They would lock in very large amounts of silver and gold, knowing that they would be paid. And in a business that is as volatile as this is, you have to hedge your positions. If you agree to sell me 1 million ounces of silver, you're going to have to hedge that position because every dollar it moves, it's $1 million one way or the other. And so it's a situation where it's about reputation more than anything, and people knowing that I would honor my word. We're what's called an authorized reseller. There are 7 or 8 primary distributors, and there are 27 authorized resellers. They used to make a much bigger deal about it, but it just simply means that we are nominated by one of the primary distributors to be an authorized reseller. There's only 27 since 1986. The difference between a primary distributor and an authorized reseller is in essence a $50 million line of credit to the U.S. Mint. All the other conditions and commitments are more or less the same. But yes, being connected to the U.S. Mint, very high up on the food chain, has been a defining characteristic of my career for sure.
Silver Slayer, how did you get started with precious metals on your YouTube channel?
Well, my grandpa would always give me some constitutional silver every Christmas. So the seed was planted very early, but it wasn't until probably 2013, 2014, I was looking into investing, and nothing made as much sense as precious metals. I looked at several different things, stocks and everything, but luckily I found the silver stacking community on YouTube. I think it started with that episode from Pawn Stars. You remember that episode from Pawn Stars where that guy comes in and dumps that big box on the table? I think that might have clicked with me because, I mean, at first it's so cool, to have this like treasure. I used to look at it like pirate treasure. But then I started learning about the intrinsic value of it and what it brings to the table beyond something that's just on a screen or a number on a screen. So in 2015, I started just posting little YouTube videos of like me showing my favorite coins or just unboxing some stuff. And then it translated into me starting to educate people on, what's the best type of coin to buy from a beginner or bullion versus numismatics. And then as I learned about the economy and how silver plays an influence in different markets, then I started diving into more of that. Like it's kind of cool to see my channel is like it's like a whole blossoming of my understanding of silver itself. Because before I never knew any about manipulation or the dollar. So I kind of have just like taken my audience with me on how I'm learning as well. And then I met Andy and now I'm introduced to the BRICS and geopolitics. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
All right, cool, cool. Well, I'm going to ask you both a series of questions, and I'll leave it up to you two, which one want to answer, and then we'll go ahead and let you guys do a follow up or whatever you want to add to, and then go ahead and let the others ask you some questions if they choose to. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. What percentage of people in the United States own precious metals?
Less than 0.5% allocation from Joe and Jane six-pack to the Harvard Endowment Fund. So whether you're talking the public or institutions, hedge funds, fund like educational pension funds, the Texas Teachers Fund is probably the largest holder. I think at one point they bought $1 billion worth of gold, or pretty darn close to it. But less than 0.5% allocation from the very lowest all the way up to the top in terms of allocation to precious metals in the U.S. financial matrix.
Wow, that's pretty small percentage.
In 1980, it was about 8%. The average over the past 40 years that's a five-fold increase in demand in an industry that would immediately experience massive dislocations in availability and in price. It's called premium, the cost that it takes to buy the material from the mints and the refineries and the public in and above its melt value. That is the premium. And as an example, during COVID, the price of a silver eagle was industry-wide between $12 and $17 over the price of silver, depending upon when you looked at it. My entire career, it never exceeded $3.50. Now right now it's just under $5. It's come back a bit, but premium is a function not only of production and distribution, but of supply and demand. And when you realize there's so much money out there due to the suppression of interest rates and all of the money that's been created, there's more money created in the last 4 years in this country than in the entire history of the country that precedes it. And so there's so much money out there, and just a very small allocation to precious metals. If you see some sort of an event that wakes people up, similar to the way it did during Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank and COVID. During Silicon and Signature Valley Bank, we added 14,000 clients in 45 days. That's 4 or 5 years worth of client acquisition. So the public is very reactionary instead of proactive, and that's why so few people really succeed in investing, because they follow the herd instead of following their gut or their intuition. And trusting your intuition is very important at a period of time that we are in, when everything that we have to look at as a comparison, there's nothing like it where we are, where we have $35 trillion in debt. It just crossed it last night, but that doesn't take into account 99 trillion in Medicaid underfunded, 22 trillion in Medicaid Part B. Part D is the prescription, and that's 22 trillion, 77 trillion in Social Security. We have pretty darn close to 200 trillion in debt, both funded and unfunded. We're creating $100,000 in debt every second. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 24/7. $1 trillion every 100 days. That's it took 200 years to do that the first time, and 1 trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. So the people at some point are going to wake up to the necessity of owning precious metals. So what is an opportunity right now, in my opinion, is the fact that it's the availability. Less than, I don't sell it for people to become wealthy. It is wealth. It's wealth that's outlived 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic. It's outlived everything the world's ever thrown at it. And here we are 5,000 years after it was mentioned in the Bible, I don't know how many hundreds of times. And we see the central banks of the world buying it at a level the world has never seen before. Over the last 2.5, 3 years, they're buying it at a level no one has ever seen over the last 100 years. And so they're the ones pushing the price up, whereas the American public has really been absent over the last year or so from this market. So when you talk about what the opportunity is, I wouldn't tell you to buy it to get wealthy. It is wealth. But I
Right.
would tell you that buying it now is the one reason to really consider it more than anything else is the availability, because we have seen that when the public wakes up, it just disappears and premiums go parabolic. And with only a 0.5% allocation, whatever the linchpin is that wakes people up, I think the obvious place to go is precious metals, not only because of its value and what it represents, but that it has no counterparty risk. You hold it yourself. You don't have to worry about bankruptcy or default or confiscation or whatever it may be. It's in your possession. And so I think
Right.
that's a number that will grow much higher as time rolls on.
Yeah, because I was telling them in our class that, to me and my wife, we're contrarian investors. You know what I mean? We don't look at things and by what others say. I mean, as far as the masses, we just don't jump in when it's high. It's supposed to buy low and sell high, correct? I'm
Yeah,
saying,
and that's hard for most people to do.
right, right. We look at things that, before anybody else really looking at them, you know what I mean? And by be time those things actually take off, this is how I was teaching them, this is how the wealth get wealthy. By the time those things take off, they have gotten their money and they're going on to the next thing. They pulled it out and they putting that money into the next big thing. You know what I mean? That's how you create wealth. One reason to, create wealth.
Right.
So as a contrarian investor, you're fearful when everybody is greedy. When everybody's fearful, then you be greedy.
That's right. And those are actually very wise words. Easier to say than to implement, in the respect that, most people, when the price is moving up and everyone is jumping into it, and in theory you should think at some point of reallocating it to an undervalued asset, it's a very difficult thing to do, every bit as much as it is to buy something that is, universally thought of as, well, in the case of gold, an archaic relic. But the interesting thing about gold that really no one understands, very few, is that if you go back to the year 2000, it's outpaced. You take Bitcoin out of the equation, it's the one asset that started from zero that has a different track record. But you take every single traditional asset since 2000, gold has outpaced them all. Gold has outpaced the 10-year treasury by a double. It's doubled the performance of the 10-year treasury. It has beat the S&P 500 with dividends reinvested, which has averaged about 9.5% per year. Gold has averaged 9.9% compounding since 2000. And it's the tortoise, not the hare.
The way they print money, every time it goes up a penny, it's a new all-time high. you know.
I just want to actually jump in real quick um, on that topic because it is very interesting, the psychology of investing. It is supposed to be buy low, sell high. Don't buy high, hope it goes higher. That's more like gambling, right? Investors make strategic decisions based off information. Gamblers just throw money at the wall and just hope it sticks, right? Silver makes the most sense. Like and gold, I would say. But it is interesting that people, like you said, is reactionary. They wait until every people will buy silver, but after it's already exploded, right? They follow. Most people, and I always mention this as like a joke, like just do the opposite of what the average investor does and you'll be successful, because most people get in afterwards, where you're supposed to get in before the curve, right? And it makes sense, something that's undervalued. But a lot of people, they get in afterwards because they have that confirmation that it can go higher, right? They see it finally going up. They have that validation that it can go up, and then they'll get in. But that's too late. That's when most people, are already gone. So you have to find things to get in beforehand. And if you look at investing into something, you're invested into it looking forwards, not looking at the price now. Look at where it's headed. Silver is extremely undervalued. The shortage is unfathomable. I don't even think we can understand. 770 million ounces in the red, a deficit of that in the last 4 years alone. It's actually much larger since we don't even incorporate military or aerospace. So if you're looking at buy low, sell high, that's investing 101, right? Uh, It's, low supply, high demand does what? Pushes the price up. That's investing 101. So people will realize this after the fact, but right now, people that understand it, it's very obvious.
Well
Now,
said. I agree.
yeah. Now that you mentioned that, um, now is that a what you're saying is undervalued, so it's at a discounted price right now, correct?
Yes, it is. I'll show you. Can I share my screen?
Oh,
Sure.
let me put you as
All right, can you see that?
yep.
Yes.
All right. So what I want to show you, let me make this bigger. Just a second. I used this for a presentation I just made the other day. What you see right there are the commodities traded on the COMEX, which is the New York Commodity Exchange, which basically sets the price around the world. And the red line represents four very large commercial bullion banks. The green line represents the eight biggest bullion banks. The four is included in the eight. So that green line would be the red line plus four other banks. There are eight very large commercial banks. They would be like Bank of America, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, HSBC, etc. These banks are shorting commodities. Now you can see what is happening in the price of silver. You have
Mm.
eight banks that are, for whatever reason, as dumb as a mud wall in a rainstorm, shorting the price of silver to a degree that no one has ever seen. In fact, it is the largest concentrated short position in the history of the COMEX market. Ask yourself, why? Why would this happen? Now, I'm going to show you why this is happening, but here is what the rest of the world is doing as a result of it. The folks in China, in India, in Russia, Saudi Arabia, this is what they're doing. Those are the vaults right now. That is the Western, excuse me, the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association. It's the largest holding of silver in the world. They're draining it. They are draining. They're standing for delivery, these countries. No one ever stood for delivery before. So as we have eight banks suppressing the price of silver to the highest degree, naked shorting, meaning they're shorting it and don't even have the silver to deliver if called for delivery in large numbers. But that's what the banks around the world, like India and China, are doing. They're standing for delivery. No one ever did that before. These countries were never sophisticated enough, coordinated enough, wealthy enough, or had any desire to stand for delivery. But you have sovereign nations and sovereign wealth funds that are using this suppression right here. Look at the top four naked. These are all short positions. This is not how natural markets work. And you have eight banks that have the largest short position of any commodity ever traded in silver. And this is what is happening. Well, here's the reason why. And this is what Slayer was talking about. This is from a subcommittee hearing. You can Google it, S.2768 in 1942. And I Googled it, and you can find this right online. And I'll just read the first couple paragraphs. This was in 1942. The present consumption of silver for war purposes is at a rate of about 100,000 ounces a year and is growing rapidly. According to the War Production Board, it is only a matter of months before war demands will have increased sufficiently to require at least 200 million ounces per year. All right, that's 1942. Now, arguably, the weaponry that the military industrial complex makes that is sold all around the world in all of these wars, it's far more sophisticated than it was in 1942. I gave two speeches in the last 2 years in Vancouver. 2 years ago, I gave a speech where I said there's 500 ounces in the tip of a Tomahawk cruise missile. And a man came up to me after my speech. He says, you know, I helped develop the Tomahawk. I work for the Department of Defense. He says, I know there's some silver in it, but I'm not quite sure. I'll get back to you. And I never heard from him again until I was out there last January, this last January in Vancouver, gave a different speech, and there he was. And he had a bunch of pictures in his hand. And he said, you know, I actually developed the Tomahawk, and here's the proof. And he showed me, he said the biggest challenge was shooting him out of a vertically off of a platform because they were made to come out of a tube of a submarine and this and that. And he said, but you know what? I'll be damned. You're right. There's 500 ounces of silver. There's roughly 13 to 14 kilograms in the tip of a tomahawk. And so when you see this in 1942, they're talking about needing 200 million ounces a year. Now, here's the supply demand numbers. I don't know if you can see this well. These are the supply demand numbers from the Silver Institute. What do we notice missing? Industrial, 9%. Electrical and electronics, 9%, of which photovoltaics, that would be solar panels, 20%. Brazing, alloys, and solders, 3%. Other industrial, 9%. Photography, -3%. Jewelry, 4%. Silverware, 7%. Where is this? And could that be why you see this? Why you have 8 Western banks doing everything in their power to suppress the price of silver in a very unnatural way? The London Bullion Metals Association, this one right here, who's watching all of its silver disappear, they have 800 million ounces of silver in their vaults. And 500 million of it belong to, you can see just over 800 million there, 500 belong to the ETFs, registered in the names of the ETFs, like Bullion Vault and SLV and whatnot. That leaves just over 300 million, yet they admit to trading 292 million ounces of silver per day. But that 292 million ounces of silver per day, they admit to being 10 times understated because they only show the final settlement numbers, not all of the trades that it took to get there, which would mean they're trading roughly 2.9 billion ounces of silver per day. That's 3.5 times global mine supply annually per day. They are holding the price down because of this. And they don't want the world to know that silver is needed for high-tech weaponry, for aerospace, for stealth bombers, for weapons of sophisticated nature that have sophisticated guidance systems. They all need silver. And about 500 ounces in the tip of a tomahawk. So in 1942, if we needed 200 million, what do we need now? And does that explain why 8 banks in the West would be as stupid as they are to try and suppress the price? But what's happening is that the sophisticated traders around the globe in Japan, China, India, Saudi Arabia, Russia, they're standing for delivery, and they never did before. So when you talk about silver, it is wealth, but it is unquestionably the most undervalued asset on the planet, and it has nothing to do with supply-demand fundamentals, the price. It has everything to do with these 8 banks. And these 8 banks are going to get caught. I think they are trying to stop doing what they're doing and get out of these short positions. But what does that say for the military-industrial complex? It's a very sticky wicket because silver is disappearing globally, not only above ground, but below. So I just wanted to add that to the equation. I'll stop sharing and we can keep moving on.
So with that being said, silver is like I said, it is wealth, but it's also a industrial metal. I mean, it's used in just about everything, solar panels, vehicles, your watches, like I said, and military equipment like missiles. It's just using a ton of different items we use every day that we don't realize that silver is in there.
Yeah, silver is the most highly conductive metal for thermal conductivity, electricity, and light sensitivity. So nothing can replace it. We're talking about elements on the periodic table here. And it's not made in the Earth's mantle. It got here from meteors and comets. There's only so much. And mining is getting harder. There's only, there's less and less of it. But it's also a byproduct. It's found by accident. There's only a few silver miners. I'm actually interviewing the CEO of one tomorrow with Andy, but there's very few. So think about this. An ounce of gold that gets dug up out of the ground, it's going to stay in circulation for centuries because gold is used mainly for watches and earrings and coins and bars. They get melted down back into more watches, earrings, coins, and bars. Silver, on the other hand, is an industrial metal, so it goes into a solar panel or EV, gets thrown away in a landfill. Silver's not really recycled much. So not only is there a huge shortage, but it's also harder and harder to get, right? Since it's becoming extinct, it's not recycled. So yeah, so looking at that on top of everything, it just makes it even harder because it's not replaceable. You could think some people think, well, one day we could just replace it, but this is an element on the periodic table. It's the most highly conductive metal for thermal conductivity and electricity. So, that as well.
Thank you. Why is it so important to own a certain percentage of precious metals, whether you hold it or in your portfolio?
Well, I think that it's very important. It's wealth. It's wealth that has outlived everything the world has ever thrown at it. It is not an investment. And I think when you talk about the value of the dollar, it is losing value precipitously. And it is the debt accumulation that we are seeing right now is of epidemic proportions. We are bankrupting this country. We're bankrupting our children and our grandchildren, and they will be slaves to debt. You have to pay the piper at some point, and we have lived well beyond our means. I mean, we're literally creating $100,000 of debt per second, 24/7. And that is, we've become the largest debtor nation on the planet. And we are reliant upon, in many cases, foreign creditors to buy our bonds to finance our living. And yet the fiscal irresponsibility of the government, who is spending money unchecked, is destroying the value of this currency. And so you don't buy gold and silver as an investment. To me, you buy it to escape the madness of fiscal irresponsibility and monetary policy that is destroying this country's prestige and destroying its currency from the inside out.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thank you. You kind of touched on this a little bit. Why are there other countries and the people in those countries buying up precious metals, and America and the people in America are so resisting to purchase?
Well, because, I mean, that's a deep question. I'll just simply say this to you, that, let me see how I can say this without I don't want to be too complicated. I'll try and make this as simple as I can get. At the end of World War II, the dollar became the world reserve currency because we took over for the pound sterling. And it was at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, where this was decided. The Allies met, and the United States would be the world reserve currency. And we told the world that if they would take our dollars, they could always exchange them back to the government for a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. And that made our currency as good as gold. In fact, we ended up, excuse me, I'm battling some allergies. We ended up holding most of the world's gold after that too, because these countries who had been through 2 world wars were able to send their gold here to the United States, where it was safe and Western rule of law. And we would hold their gold and we would pay them $35 an ounce for it. And then they could take the proceeds, those $35, and buy US treasuries, which would yield a return for a non-interest bearing asset that they no longer had to store within their own borders. And they could always exchange those dollars back at any time into gold for $35 an ounce. So it was a good deal all the way around. And that's what made the dollar the world reserve currency until the end of the Vietnam War, when President de Gaulle from France said, well, they're printing more money than they have gold behind it. We should give them back their dollars and get the gold. And that's what he did. He sent warships to New York Harbor filled with dollar bills and said, give us back our gold. And we did. But then President Nixon took a very unconventional step in August of 1971, and he closed the gold window. He went back on our promise to the world. No more exchanging dollars for gold. We're keeping what we have. And it was supposed to only be temporary. It's never opened back up. At that point, the dollar was backed by absolutely nothing. That's called fiat. And it was that way for another 2.5, 3 years until Henry Kissinger went to Saudi Arabia in 1974 and struck a deal with the Saudi kingdom. And he said to the Saudis, we will protect you and OPEC, all the oil producing countries. No one will ever mess with you. We will provide you weapons. Think military industrial complex, the need to make high-tech weapons. We will protect you and your allies who are in OPEC. But for that, you will value oil globally in US dollars. And you will take any excess and you will recycle those dollars into US treasuries. And that was the deal that we've seen for the last 50 years. It created a synthetic demand for the US dollar where every single country in the world has had to stockpile dollars in order to accumulate oil. It's called the petrodollar. We could call this Bretton Woods 2, all right? The first one where we were backed by gold. The second one, it's the petrodollar. About a month ago, the Saudis decided to not re-up at the 50th anniversary of this signing, decided to not re-up the exclusivity deal, meaning they've decided that they want to be able to sell oil in other currencies as well. And they've joined the BRICS, as you mentioned earlier, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and then it became Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia. They also admitted Argentina, but when Milei took over, he dropped out. 59 countries have subsequently said that they want to formally apply. Another 35 or 40 are informally saying they want to apply. That represents in and of itself just the 10 countries right now, a larger swath of human population than the West, larger percentage of global GDP, 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals on the planet, a much stronger military might combined. They produce the majority of all the rare earth metals. They refine 100% of them. So this electric thing hadn't been thought out real well. The Eurasian continent and China mine roughly 80% and refine 100%. They have struck deals through something called the Belt Road Initiative, the largest infrastructure project in human history. China is connecting Asia, Africa, South America, and parts of Europe. And all of the countries combined in the Belt Road represent 75% of human population, 50% of global GDP. Every OPEC country, all of them are on the Belt Road Initiative. The West is not. China and the BRICS nations are going in and developing infrastructure, railroads, bridges, maritime channels, building oil rigs and refineries, gold and silver mines, building the highways and all of the routes to transport all of these commodities to the market and industrialize these under-industrialized countries in a cooperative fashion. This is accelerating tremendously. And what has made the dollar the world reserve currency not only is our backing of the Saudi kingdom and OPEC, and that's changing because that's called hegemony. It's gone. The fact that they are now selling oil in other currencies mean the hegemony, meaning 100% in essence, it's gone. The supremacy isn't, but the hegemony is, and it's accelerating. But when it becomes much more concerning to me on another level, and that is what has largely, made the United States and the U.S. Treasury market so demanding the dollar. Now, this is not a comment about Putin or about war, but when you are the world reserve currency, it is not your prerogative to say you can do this and you can't. All right. So when you realize, let's use an example. And I am answering your question. And I think the most important way I can tell you anything, this is it. We invaded Iraq 20 years ago under the guise of weapons of mass destruction. And oops, we're sorry, we didn't find any. Sorry, we destroyed your country, we toppled your regime, and we're still occupying your country 20 years later. And we're sanctioning 14 of your banks, again, sanctioning through the SWIFT system, blocking them so they can't do business because they have the audacity to try to buy oil and route it through Iranian banks or liquid natural gas to cool their homes in the summer. So those 14 banks that were trying to trade with Iranian banks have been sanctioned. And we hold all of their oil revenue. They're not even allowed 20 years later to direct their natural resource revenue. It's held in the New York Fed. And at the end of last year, they asked us for $1 billion of the 90 billion they made in revenue in 2023. And we said, listen, not a good time. Let's do this next year. So they have made subsequently trading in dollars illegal. If you own a business and you trade in dollars, you'll end up in prison and your business taken by the government. They are kicking Western coalition forces out of the country as we speak. They have officially applied to BRICS, and there are no green dollar bills in any bank in Iraq at all. They're all gone as of January 1st. Janet Yellen can say to CNN, listen, we're okay with Xi Jinping and Putin being allies and friends in the BRICS nations, but if Xi gives 1 penny to the Putin war machine, we will sanction their banks, their companies in Beijing itself. Now, my thought is, well, what about the $260 billion? Trump would have only needed $6 more billion to build a wall to protect our children from being poisoned with fentanyl. That was too much, but $260 billion to the Ukraine with no congressional oversight, F-16 fighter jets, Stinger missiles, and the intelligence on where to drop it, that doesn't count. So we can make these rules and you can't. So what have we done? We have stolen $5 billion worth of their treasuries held in the United States. Stolen, we've taken them. That's default. And worse than that, we've taken the proceeds and given it to the military-industrial complex, holding silver down to make weapons to give to the country they're in the midst of a war with. Not cool. The European Union is holding $280 billion worth of frozen treasuries. Saudi Arabia just told the European Union, if you do what you're about to do, and they just voted to do it, and that is to give the Ukraine $50 billion secured by the interest that they are taking from the $280 billion in European treasuries. They're stealing it. Mm-hmm. And because evidently what they do doesn't matter, but what Russia does matter. And so they're taking it. And Saudi Arabia said, if you do this, we will immediately start dumping all European treasuries, starting with the French treasuries. What I'm getting at is that the trust is gone. We have lost trust by weaponization of the dollar and the treasury. And this is not about right or wrong. This is not about red or blue. It's not about which side I'm on. It's the fact that if you want to be the world reserve currency, you must be impartial. You cannot choose sides, and especially a country that goes around the world issuing sanctions that many across the globe would consider to be incredibly hypocritical. And so these countries are all finding a union in the BRICS, safety in numbers, and they are growing together fast. And they will represent the majority of human population, the majority of military might, larger swath of GDP, and the majority of all the world's commodities. Which leads me to a man named Zoltan Pozsar, who was a very influential man at the New York Federal Reserve. He now is in the private sector at Union Bank of Switzerland, and he's brilliant. And he said this is now Bretton Woods 3. When Saudi Arabia did not re-up the exclusivity deal, meaning we're going to sell in other currencies, not just dollars, but whatever we want, it became Bretton Woods 3. And this is a system all about who has the commodities. And you can see the biggest money in the world is doing all they can to accumulate the world's commodities. And most of them are in those countries. So we are on the cusp of losing the world reserve standard. We are on the cusp of many countries across the globe dumping dollars. And this is a very, very important time to look at the world differently. Do you know how I do this?
I think you click on my name and then you should see make host.
So everybody, when I was talking about in class about the BRICS nation, I was telling you guys to look that up. The BRICS nation stands for with Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
That's the
And
original 10 or five. Yes.
yes, and right now there, like you said, there's 59 other countries that's applying for the BRICS.
Formally applied. That is
Yeah,
correct.
yeah. So that means that more than half the world is going to be against us, the West, which is America, Canada, and part of Europe, correct?
Yeah, the
Versus,
G7. Yeah, I was gonna
versus
ask
everybody.
Andy to explain the G7. That's our side of the BRICS nations. You know, it's BRICS
Yeah. So,
G7.
yeah. And the G7 are the countries that are broke, that are insolvent, that have given away all of their manufacturing capability and have very little in the way of natural resource capability. And the G7 are the most indebted nations on the planet. It's the 500-year hegemony of the West versus the rest of the world, who is now becoming industrialized. And the G7 is a group that is, I think, very desperate um, to maintain. You've got Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. You're talking the most indebted countries in the world. And, you know, the United Kingdom just recently submitted an article that said, we made a mistake because we have nothing in the way of natural resources and we're beholden on everything we need, most of it from the Eurasian continent, from the BRICS countries, energy and food and fertilizer and all of these things. Um, and so the countries that have been buying our bonds for all of these years, who aren't anymore, like China and Russia and Saudi Arabia and India, they're selling them at a pace that the world's never seen, super fast. And they're buying gold with it. Gold has outpaced the 10-year treasury 2 to 1 in the last 25 years, and it cannot be confiscated by or sanctioned or stolen the way that the treasury can. And so all of these governments are selling treasuries and dollars, and they're buying gold, which was reclassified in 2019 by the Bank of International Settlements, which is the most powerful bank in the world. Think of it as the puppet master. The central bank, the most powerful group in the world, reclassified it as the world's only other tier 1 asset. Since the end of World War II at Bretton Woods, it's US dollars and treasuries were tier 1. And now gold is there too. So when you see the central banks buying it at the level they are and selling treasuries, they're removing counterparty risk. They're removing the dependency on the dollar. They no longer have to stockpile it for energy. And they are using gold as an alternative to the bond market because it can't be sanctioned, and it's doubled the performance of the 10-year treasury over the last 25 years. So it's a changing time. And I guess, you know, at the end of any long macro trend, any system that's come to the end of its efficiency, it's hard for people to think this time's different. Recency bias and normalcy bias gets in the way, but ask yourselves, I mean, on top of everything else, all of the things that have happened around the country, lawlessness in the cities, and this country used to pride itself on letting everyone into this country, but they would come the right way and they would apply, they would assimilate, they would contribute. They wouldn't just come across disrespectfully. 20 million people in this country illegally. If 1% has bad intentions, like the folks in Dearborn, Michigan, who are screaming death to America, that's 200,000 people. 5% is a million. That's bigger than a standing army. 0.1% is 20,000 people who want to do bad things, and they weren't checked, and they're coming in from all around the world, and it's a bad thing. On top of that, and I don't want to get political because it's not, but I think the rest of the world looks at us and says, is their electoral process fair or not? Is their judicial system fair or not? Is their immigration system messed up? These are the cornerstones of what made the United States the envy of the world. And if you have to question if the elections are fair or not, whether or not, doesn't matter what your opinion is. The people around the world are wondering, is it fair? I wonder. Not, yes, of course it is. It's the United States. And is there a two-tier justice system? Instead of, yes, of course there isn't. People are wondering, is there? And all of these things that have made this country great, like the nuclear family, like believing in God, like saying the Pledge of Allegiance in elementary school, they're gone. And now your merit is based upon your lifestyle preference instead of, or you're scored or judged upon your lifestyle preference instead of your merit. How hard did you work? Instead of everything being equality, it's equal opportunity, and that's gone. And these are the hallmarks of what made this country so strong. And the rest of the world is noticing it. So when you talk about why should you own it in your portfolio, because this country is at the end of its rope financially, and you could argue morally, spiritually, something's going to break.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you own gold and silver, because it's wealth that has outlived everything the world's thrown at it. And through it all, the biggest money in the world, the central banks are buying it at a level the world's never seen. It's just not the United States central bank. And in fact, they're doing everything they can to hang on to the last vestiges of power that's slipping away because of their own stupid decisions, both monetarily, fiscally, and also their policies around the globe. And that's why you own gold and silver. And that to me is unequivocal.
Got anything you want to add, Slater?
Yeah. This stuff sounds scary, and it is scary. We're talking about a huge power shift from the west to east, and the dollar's lost 98% of its original purchasing power. 98, that's a factual percentage. Not 97, not 90, not 98%. And every fiat-based system does collapse. It lasts around a century. Like the dollar is eventually going to collapse. Gold and silver is like putting your money in a time capsule. A perfect example is a walking Liberty half dollar back in the day could get you a gallon of gas because gas was 50 cents. A walking Liberty half dollar had silver in it, right? Because silver was money. That same walking Liberty half dollar can get me a gallon of gas today. Wait, Slayer, gas isn't 50 cents. I know, but I could take that coin, walk to my local coin shop, and get myself a couple gallons of gas. See, silver's timeless. That same coin could get me back in the day what it can today, but 2 quarters today can't get me a gallon. If back then I had 2 quarters of today's, I would be screwed. Silver's timeless. It's like putting your money in a time capsule as the dollar depreciates. And if you're talking about passing it down to our kids or grandkids, we're talking about a system that's failing, and it's very important, in my opinion. Like Andy was saying, this huge power shift in the state of the dollar. So
Yes, thank you. So you mentioned about they're selling treasuries, which is pretty much selling the dollars. So all these countries are selling their treasury back in their dollars. Those dollars come back here to the United States. Would that create hyperinflation or somewhat type of a
Correct.
hyperinflation where our money
Correct.
would be pretty much worthless? That's why
Correct.
another reason why you want to be in precious metals, because the dollar's going to be worthless. Now,
Well, but if you see hyperinflation, what is
mhm,
the byproduct of that? Byproduct of that is interest rates that have to compensate for the destruction in purchasing power. You cannot have 30% inflation and 5% interest rates, or your currency dies. If you lose 25% purchasing power every single year, you're dead. So the market would dictate interest rates must be double, way higher than they are now, like 30%, or your currency dies. And so at 30% interest rates, well, think about the banks that are almost blowing up at 5%. At 30%, every one of these overcapitalized or over leveraged, undercapitalized banks blows up. The insurance companies that are 95% treasuries, they blow up. Stocks, bonds, and real estate, they all blow up. It's the Great Reset. If you saw interest rates at that level, that is the Great Reset that Klaus Schwab talked about, where everything that is inversely correlated to a massive spike in interest rates resets. What would the real estate market be like at 35 or 40% mortgage rates? And it's done.
yeah,
And everything is done. And all of that money that has been created over the years in low interest rates has distorted asset prices. Let me give you an example of how bad it can be. And although this is the worst I've seen, there is a building in St. Louis, Missouri, and it was called the former One AT&T Center.
yeah.
And it's the fourth largest building in downtown St. Louis, 44 stories tall. It was sold in 2006 for $205 million. It just sold for $3.7 million. So you too can own a 44-story tall office building, the fourth tallest in all of St. Louis, for $3.7 million. It was sold for $205 million 20 years ago. So when you talk about asset value, what are things worth in a world that has been distorted through suppressed interest rates and easy money, where hedge funds can borrow unlimited amounts of money at next to nothing and distort asset prices by plowing it into real estate investment trusts, they buy all these residential homes and rent them out, Airbnb, they're buying all the stocks, doing all this stuff with free money and distort the heck out of values. That's messing with Mother Nature. Interest rates should be controlled by the market, not by the government. And the distortion of interest rates and the raining down of easy money to Wall Street has created massive dislocations in asset prices, in real estate prices, in everything. And when this corrects, when Mother Nature corrects, as she will, it will be a religious experience for most people in this country who will not see what's coming at them. And I mean that wholeheartedly. I didn't come on this call with any intention of selling anyone anything. That's not how I operate. In fact, when I started this company 34 years ago, I was a 19-year-old kid who went to the University of Minnesota to play baseball, and I hurt myself. And I started a company with my dad in a one-room office. We come from nothing, zero. My parents sold their life insurance policies. My dad's middle name is Miles. His best friend who lent us 60 grand in 1989, his middle name is Franklin. And in a closet-sized office 35 years ago almost, we started on a wing and a prayer. I am the American dream. We just did 10 billion in sales, crossed it. 35 years without a customer complaint. But I will tell you something, my entire career, I own gold for one reason. My dad said to me, there's one rule and only one rule, or I'll fire you. You will not make the same mistake I made as a younger man. Your mom and I just sold our life insurance policies. I borrowed this money from my friend. We're going to give this a go, but I have nothing to fall back on. So you, my son, will buy something every 2 weeks. You'll buy, I don't care what it is, an ounce of silver, whatever. You'll buy it when you get paid or I'll fire you. And that was 34 and a half years ago. I've owned the company outright for 2 decades. My dad's still alive. I talk to him every day. He won't fire me anymore. But I've honored my promise to him as the best gift I've ever been given in my life, the gift of learning the power of compounding, working for you instead of against you, and the power of paying yourself first. And it's wealth to me. It has been. I've never missed a 2-week period in 34 and a half years, ever. And to me, it's wealth. And that's how I've always sold it. But as a father of 3 kids in a world that's gone upside down in the last 3 years and seems to be spinning faster and faster and faster out of control, you own gold and silver to get out of the way of what's coming. And I mean that wholeheartedly. So I'm sorry if the message is somewhat dark. Unfortunately, there's a fine line between pessimism and realism anymore. And I think it's important to at least know what's coming, because you can't get out of the way of what you don't see coming. And if everything I've said, you should do your own research. Everything I've said is factual, and it's rooted in fact. And I spend 3-4 hours a day, 7 days a week studying and have for years. How it all plays out, I don't know. But I think it's never been more important to get your house in order, whether it be, food and water and batteries. And because when this all breaks, what we will see is a massive contraction of credit. The banks who have extended credit will rip it in. And we're beginning to see that right now. The banks are contracting credit because they don't want to lend it to any of you or me, none of us, because there's too much risk. And so what you're seeing, this inversion of the yield curve that we've seen for 2 years, where the short-term rates were higher than the long-term rates. Now that doesn't make sense, because if you're gonna borrow me $100 for 2 months, you're gonna want, okay, I'll do it for 2%. But if I ask you to borrow $100 for 10 years, you would want a little bit more. Not only is there a greater chance of default, but you'd lose the ability to use that money. So I got to pay you more. Well, for the last 2 years, it's been inverted. You get higher rate for short-term than long-term. And that is the market's way of saying we don't like what we see coming. So we're going to load into the stuff now. Well, the banks, right now are you're seeing the curve uninvert. And it's not an uninverting on a healthy way where the long-term rates are going up because the future's looking bright. It's because the insiders, the big money, the banks, they're saying, I'm not going to lend money to you guys. The economy is way too rough. You're going to end up defaulting. So instead, I'm going to give it to the Fed and I'm going to buy short-term treasuries at 5%. Well, the rates are now starting to go down on the short term. It's because the insiders are betting that rates are going to go lower and that the economy is I mean, they make money by lending it. So instead of getting a higher rate of lending it to us, they'd rather give it to the Treasury and take their short-term treasuries and take the risk out of the equation. Every time that the curve is uninverted since 1950, every single time that there's been an inverted yield curve and it uninverts, there's never been a time since 1950 where it didn't precede a massive recession. So we are heading into a recession when things are going to get much more difficult. So, when you see the reining in of credit, just think of how much credit is used to bring a loaf of bread to the grocery store. The farmer who drives a combine, that's $500,000, and the diesel fuel and the seeds to plant the farm and all his bills, he's using credit. He plants his field, he gets the wheat, and he gives it to a trucking company to bring to the flour mill. Well, the trucking company's on credit for their trucks and their fuel and their payroll, and they bring it to a flour mill to refine it. Who's on credit? Who gives it to another trucking company? Who's on credit? Who brings it to the baker? Who's on credit? Who bakes the bread and brings it to the grocery store, but gives it to another trucking company first? Who's on credit? To the grocery store? Who's on credit? All of that credit touched a seed to the bread. And when you see the banks rein that credit in or start to collapse because they are massively over leveraged, and the Fed just came out, the Fed just came out and said there's 50 or 60 banks that are terminally in trouble right now because they're that much overextended and undercapitalized. These are why we've seen these banks fail, and there will be more. So you prepare right now. You have cash on hand, 5s, 10s, and 20s. You have food, water, home protection. If you can buy silver and gold, do it as often as you can. Even if it's a few ounces a week or every other week or a month, pay yourself first and prepare not only for a hurricane of financial proportions, but a real one where you see a huge contraction of credit. The trucks aren't running, the stores aren't, the shelves aren't stocked. I mean, to say this can't happen is a mistake, and it can, and it will if things get bad enough. So that would be my advice to people right now.
Yes, I agree, because you just won't have the financial or economical issue, but you're going to have a social issue on top of that when all this stuff comes home through roost, which
Correct.
is, like you said, protection, you know, for what you have for you and your family.
Correct.
Yes. So, speaking of that, hold on, let me get this back up here. So why isn't the media reporting on the precious metals, gold and silver, and what the central banks are doing and buying and things like that? You know.
Blair, you want to take that one?
No, you can go ahead. You're good. I love
Um,
listening to you,
I
man.
don't know, you guys. I mean, the media doesn't do a poor job of telling us what's happening. They do no job. They create divisiveness. And they're not telling us what's important. Um, Gold and silver represent the antithesis to the dollar in the Western system. So they're doing all that they can to keep people in traditional assets, lead the sheep to slaughter, really, keep all of them in
Right.
dollars and in stocks and bonds. And, you look at the stock market, there's just about 5 or 6 stocks that have been holding up the Magnificent Seven, been holding up the entire indice. And when you realize that, the Russell 2000, which is a much better indication of the economy, almost every stock is underwater. You got a handful of stocks like an inverted pyramid holding up the whole indice, and now they're starting to collapse. They just want people to, as we were saying earlier, buy low, sell high. No, they'll do the opposite of that. So you can't rely upon the media. That's the bottom line. You need to seek out alternative media.
Right.
And as much, I mean, all I can tell you is that there's a wealth of information on the alternative media, and all of it. There's a lot of good information, a lot of really good information, and that will open your eyes to the fact that we're being lied to by the establishment. We're being lied to, and on many levels. And that's, if I'll put it to you this way, you can be very well read in this country, but read the wrong stuff and have no idea what's coming. You have to go outside your comfort zone. You have to, I mean, I would read Zero Hedge every day. I would watch YouTube channels like the Silver Slayer channel. I would look at the information on Twitter, X. There's a tremendous amount. Follow people like Elon Musk. Start following people who are talking about what's really happening, backing it up with fact. Um, Broaden your horizon. You know, I grew up in a house. My parents were hippies, and my house smelled like pot smoke growing up. I was a jock. I went to the University of Minnesota to play baseball, but I grew up believing that didn't matter. It didn't matter what color you were, what race you were, what your sexual preference was, if you smoked weed or if you didn't. I didn't care. I mean, I may not agree with it. I was a jock. I had my own thing, but I understood and respected everyone's lifestyle and preferences, and you could still be my friend. And I think that's gone in this country. We're so divided, and that's the problem. We need to understand and listen to other viewpoints. If we don't, we will never grow. We will learn more and more and more about less and less till we know everything about nothing. And the media is creating divisiveness, period, 100%. And I just think that the only way to really understand what's happening in this world is to tune out the mainstream media and to start finding alternative sources. And I know that Jordan could provide many of these for you in an email. Together. We could give you the top 10 sites that we like to read every day that would give you an opinion, all factually based, that you're not hearing or seeing at all on the mainstream, who just has dropped the ball completely. Journalistic integrity is dead in this country.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in real quick. Silver is a direct threat to the dollar, right? Just like, even literally, when the dollar index is higher, gold and silver is lower, and vice versa. It's a direct threat. So of course they want us investing and having our money into things that are pegged to the dollar. And when the dollar collapses, everything else is like switching seats on the Titanic. Gold and silver is wealth. Of course, they don't want you knowing that. And that's also why, my YouTube channel, if I could just reach one person and plant the seed, I've done my job. Even if you don't do anything with the information, at least because a lot of people don't even know that they don't know. They don't even have a chance because they don't know about this information. So I'm blessed to be able to offer that. At least you guys are now aware and you can make the choice on your own. But a lot of people, when it happens, they have no idea. And another thing is following the money. Why is it that the most powerful countries, the biggest banks, and all the wealthiest billionaires all invest in gold and silver, all have so much of it, right? If it's not worth anything. India, Russia, China, they're buying boatloads of gold and silver. You have banks like JP Morgan, boatloads of gold and silver. Jim Rogers, Warren Buffett, Elon Musk just bought a silver mine. All these billionaires are buying so much gold and silver, especially silver, actually. That's, that's not ironic, right? There's a reason for that. It's because they know. So, it's another point that I try to also, try to get to people is, I try to at least let people know that they do have a choice, an option, because a lot of people don't even know that they don't. So.
Yeah, that brings another point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because a lot of the billionaires, millionaires, CEOs, they're a lot of people don't know they're selling their stock shares right now and getting to liquid cash.
That's
Because they know
true.
it's going to be a
That's true. But
collapse.
a
They know
huge,
it's
a
going to be a
huge
collapse
number of
coming.
them.
Mhm.
And,
Yep.
and they're the one. I mean, why would they do that if they didn't know something was coming? They
Yeah.
wouldn't. I mean, that's the whole point. And you're seeing the insiders sell at a level that is really, really alarming.
Yeah. Open my phone back up here. Okay, so from what I have been finding out is that here in the US in the last couple of years or so, I believe there are about 4 or 5 states that has written in the law that allows gold and silver to be legal tender now, and people can pay their taxes. Is this true?
It is property taxes. Yes, they can do that. And it is a growing something I thought I would never see. You have governments recognizing that gold and silver coins issued by sovereign government mints would be applicable for all debts, public and private, including things paying your property tax. So yes, it is being recognized by some of these municipalities, and that is a really big development, something that I'm shocked to see, and but very optimistic about what that means for a greater acceptance of gold and silver moving forward.
Um, Many people don't know this, but really, the paper dollar is not money at all. It is currency, and gold and silver is real money.
That's right.
So paper dollar
JP
is really
Morgan said,
fake.
gold is money, everything else is debt. And that's what really currency is. It's an IOU. And so you're right. And it's interesting, if you can see back here, these are gold certificates that you could exchange for gold coins prior to 1933. And underneath it, it says payable to the bearer on demand in gold coin. Those old gold certificates, which they stopped making after gold was confiscated, you could exchange for gold coins from the bank. Now it says, in God we trust. So we went from being money, where it was exchangeable for gold, into currency, where it was based upon the full faith and credit of the US government.
Right, awesome, awesome. Thank you. Um, can you speak about what is counterparty risk again?
Counterparty risk is um, if you deposit your money into a bank and it goes bankrupt, if you buy a stock and the company goes bankrupt, or counterparty risk is just holding gold in your own possession has no counterparty risk because you hold it yourself. If you allow custodianship to anyone or anything, there is counterparty risk. It is the other party and their solvency where there is risk. You have a partnership in a business. You trust your partner with the money. The counterparty risk is that he steals from you. So counterparty risk is everywhere right now, and it's through the use of derivatives, where all of these banks are connected together through trades and derivatives, and um, the obligations to make good. If one of these banks or one of these companies goes bankrupt, how do they make good? And then the daisy chain, where they're all so systemically connected. Counterparty risk is very pervasive, and it will start to I think, take on a very ugly um, meaning, in the respect that, bank bailouts have been made illegal, and bank bail-ins were written into law in the Dodd-Frank Act in 2009. And if a bank goes bankrupt and you have over the FDIC limit of $250,000 in the bank, it will be bailed in. It goes away. It goes into the bank, into the fund to make the bank solvent. Well, that's counterparty risk, where, if you're over the FDIC, and the FDIC is a scam too. They have 140 billion in assets backing 18 trillion in deposits. But if just call it what it is, if you had $400,000, your life savings in a bank, and it went bankrupt, it blew up. Anything over the FDIC limit of 250 technically will be gone. That's counterparty risk. So the one thing gold is an asset that has no counterparty risk, no brokerage, no storage company, no nothing. You hold it yourself. So that's the best way I can describe it.
Um, so how are they stealing people's wealth through? I meant to. I'm sorry. Meant to mute that. Knew that was going to happen. How are they stealing people's wealth through fiat, and also how can gold and silver be a hedge against inflation?
Well, the dollar is losing a tremendous amount of value every year just in inflation. So that's, that's how your dollar loses value every single year through the inflation. And it's insidious. They lie about the inflation statistics. Real inflation right now is 11 or 12%. There's a website called shadowstats.com where John Williams, all he does is calculate the inflation numbers based upon the way they used to be calculated during the Reagan administration before they started to change all the numbers to fit an inflationary agenda. As an example, they just took coffee out of the April CPI numbers because it's up 80%, and they replace it with something like tea. If steak is too expensive, they'll replace it with ground beef. They continue to change the way they measure inflation to make it subdued. But at 7% inflation, the law of 70 seconds, which is you take interest rate and divide it into 72, tells you how long before your principal doubles, or in this case, is cut in half. At 7% inflation in 10.2 years, you lose half your purchasing power. So that's how they do it. And they do it because it makes paying off the exorbitant debt that they have that much easier. Since the beginning of time, all governments have chosen to inflate over making the tough decisions. That's why when you look at a silver coin, it's got ridges on the side of it, because that goes back to Roman times, when the Romans, kind of like where we are right now, had this vast empire all around the world. And they had to fund this vast ecosystem and the supply chains, and it was bankrupting them, kind of like it's doing to us. And so they decided to trim the edges of the coins just a little bit to pay their soldiers, because if you did that to enough coins, you'd have enough to make a bunch more. Well, and then they started just pulling all the metal out of it together, and then they collapsed. But that is the whole genesis of why there are ridges on coins, because inflation is something governments choose over austerity and have for all of time.
There's been a few times where people say, well, if something happened to the dollar, you have gold and silver. You can't eat that either. I mean,
You can't eat your dollars, and you can't eat stock certificates. And
exactly.
yeah, that one always makes me chuckle, because, what can you eat that you can call other than food if you want to have food as currency, but food goes bad?
Right.
So I'd rather have something, when no one wants dollars, that people have called wealth for 5,000 years, and exchange it. But that's why you notice I said earlier, you should have food and water and stock up on it, and be prepared. So it's, I think that's somewhat naive, here, like I'm not going to shove this dollar bill in my mouth and start eating it, when I'm hungry, any more than I would try and eat a gold coin. So I get the point, but I think it's when no one wants dollars either. What would you rather have? Opportunities or none at all?
Well,
Because, go ahead.
also silver is useful. I mean, it has antimicrobial properties. It can purify water. So dollars can do nothing, maybe toilet paper, but gold and silver actually is beneficial moving forwards. Like even if there was some type of crisis or something, silver is still extremely useful. Remember, it's the most highly conductive metal. It's used for industry technology. It's in the medical world. There's colloidal silver. It's used for medical wall paint. I mean, it's an element on the periodic table. It's God's money. So I would rather have, that in some type of situation compared it to dollars, so yeah, it is.
And plus, I believe that and from what I'm hearing, I had some people have asked farmers, if the dollar goes bad and it's worthless, could I purchase something from your farm with gold and silver? Yes, everybody's going to take gold and silver. I don't care what industry it is or what market.
Yeah. And in 5,000 years from now, like 5,000 years ago, gold and silver was money. 5,000 years from now, it still will be. We're talking about elements on the periodic table that came here from meteors and asteroids and comets. Like nothing can replace this stuff. So yeah, it's, if you think about a sci-fi movie, like flying cars and stuff, everything is, You know, it's technology, it's industrial, these digital gadgets. We're moving in a new digital advanced era where technology is king. All of that requires silver, but
Yeah.
there's not much of it left. It's going to be the first element to become extinct off the periodic table. That's an actual fact. Like you can look at, you know, all the different types of assets, but it's, you know, when you look at it just rationally and realistically, nothing makes as much sense as silver, right? Gold is also great. It's a monetary metal. Silver is an industrial metal on top of that. So silver has more opportunity, in my opinion. They both hold their place, but nothing else makes as much sense. I could sit next to someone at the bar and he could try to tell me, you know, 10 reasons why, or I could tell him 10 reasons or 10,000 reasons why gold and silver is a great investment, a great thing to have. And I could also tell him 10,000 reasons why his stocks aren't, right? And he couldn't debate that. You know, what are you going to say about gold and silver? That it's cheap? Exactly. It's cheap right now. It's undervalued. It's under the value. And if it's undervalued, that means when it does become the value or the natural value, which I do believe will happen, then what, right? It just, you can't debate it really. So,
Right, right. And speaking of technology, what just happened a couple of few weeks ago with they say outage. I believe it was a hack. So look at all the people who couldn't obtain their money. You know, I mean, people who lost money during that period. Now, if they would have, took that fake money and put it into, precious metals, all their wealth would have been preserved instead of keeping it in the bank or keeping it on any banking site
yeah.
online where they wouldn't have lost their money. They would still have that wealth. So that technology, like you said, keeping all your money in the bank is this day and age is kind of crucial, in my
We're
opinion.
trying we're trying to get ourselves out of debt by replacing it with more debt. That's like trying to pay off a credit card with another credit card. And
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's going to catch up, you know, like Andy was saying. So, you know,
Yes.
Correct.
I have one
I'm
more
gonna
question.
have. I got about another 5 minutes, guys. I have a podcast, a live stream with Liberty and Finance this evening. So I got another few questions in me.